The other thing that I want to address is one thing on the technographic ladder from Forrester, should be getting commission from Forrester, is how do you deal with critics? Because the biggest problem that most brands have is before they go into social media, they get quite scared by the fact that in a public domain, people can criticize the service that they get. And there's two ways you can do that from a marketing perspective. Obviously, you have to be prepared for that criticism and accept that there will be some. But you can do it indirectly, which is to say, you can make sure that there's a group of very vocal online advocates who are likely to step in more often than not when bad things and untruthful things are being said about a brand. And that is really the only scalable way that brands can work. Because even the big brands that we work for, they can't afford to have a team of 30 people across the globe monitoring the internet to see whether negative things are being said. So this is really the only viable alternative if you want to be proactive about it. Now, when things are untruthful, i.e. when things are undisputably wrong about a brand, there are brands which have the capacity and the inclination to go on those forums and those blogs and correct what's being said. And there's nothing wrong with that, as long as it's planned correctly and it's transparent as well. The worst case scenario is that a brand will see something that's really wrong, go onto the blog, put a correction on it, essentially. There'll be some vitriolic responses and then drift away after a few months. So if a big concern, and not every brand is really concerned about people talking negatively about them, then the key thing is to plan ahead, because this takes time and it's a long-term engagement. Another key message that I suppose I want to convey is the fact that, bizarrely almost, the online world of social media doesn't move that fast in terms of marketing objectives. As I said earlier, it takes months to make sure that you get the message you want out there correctly. And it takes probably even longer to make sure, and just in terms of planning, that your brand isn't damaged when you go out there. But once it's in place, once you've got this group of advocates out there that are ready to fight your corner, and you have just a few kind of lightweight managed social media profiles like YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, after that initial, basically, rush of stress, probably, it's almost self-maintaining and self-perpetuating. So it's an incredibly powerful marketing tool, as I'm sure everyone knows already. So what can we do? Well, basic level is what PR always used to do and what advertising used to do, which is awareness. So this is kind of like exposure to a particular message or a brand. But the thing that we can do, which is much more measurable than it used to be, is get people's attention. So we can structure things which require them, because they're working in Facebook, where they go to multiple people in order to get an opinion, swallow essentially much more complicated messages, which can then lead to a differentiator for a brand, which in a marketplace, which is obviously so competitive like yours, must be key. And the other thing we can do is we can ask them to do something. Now, it sounds crass, and again, it almost cheapens the what sometimes is the dark art of PR. But we've found that the most compelling way to get people to visit a website, which is what we're talking about, actually through social media, is competitions. Because people have actually a propensity to believe the fact that competitions, for some reason on social networks and other profiles, are just that much more winnable, probably because they've been referred to it by a friend. Now, we work in things like the airline industry. These incentives can be incredibly cheap. In fact, the quirkier the better as far as consumers are concerned. So, that's actually the end of the presentation. I'm quite glad, because social media is one of those topics which everyone knows a little bit something about. And one of the things that I like to try and do is try and ask some questions and hopefully maybe dispel some myths, or maybe learn myself. So we come afterwards if you want to receive our Twitter guides, which basically a step-by-step process to tell brands how to use Twitter a little bit more efficiently in the beginning. As I said, it's quite easy to understand, but maybe these guides can help people make less mistakes right at the beginning of them taking a step into Twitter. So, does anyone have any questions? Go for it. The idea storm. Dell. Yeah. I don't know about that one, no. I mean, I presume it's something bad. Right, yeah. Well, I mean, in terms of some interesting examples of what brands have done with social media, I can think of a few examples. Sun being probably a precursor to Dell, I presume, because they're one of the companies which has set the agenda for social media in a believable way. And in Sun's case, Sun Microsystems that is, they've got a guideline which says every single person in the company is a blogger or an advocate online for their company. And I presume that's something which was alluded to. So, I mean, it really is a brave move by any company that wants to do that. And I've only seen a handful of them that are willing to do that. And it takes an incredible amount of work beforehand to make sure it's relatively controlled. But obviously, I would say it's money well spent, because now it's just part of the HR process. Does anyone have any questions about? I mean, I can walk you through some more examples if that helps. Okay. Well, the key thing about social media is, I say, these assets. It gives you control. So, what we do for big brands in the most successful way is we generate basically an agenda, a menu of things that we're going to basically develop. We don't, obviously, because we're a PR agency, but we write the briefs for creative agencies. And they come up with everything from quite simple JPEGs, which are explosions of quite detailed problems. So, for example, it's obvious to me as an outsider that I'm not completely knowledgeable about the rules associated with some of the games. But a simple infographic, as they're termed, which is a JPEG with some arrows which appear from it with a few details, will spread like wildfire through the blogosphere. And because it's so small and portable, it'll be compelling for people to put up quite quickly as well. And in terms of development costs, well, I can tell you it shouldn't be more than £1,000 in terms of giving it to a creative agency. So it's not too prohibitive. And the other key thing, hopefully, to make the whole thing a little bit more manageable, if you are going to go away, and believe me when I say that you should go ahead and take your first step into social media, is that it doesn't necessarily have to be a full-scale interaction with your consumer. As long as you set the parameters at the start, it gives you a get-out clause. So say, for example, you wanted to start a blog on gambling with F1 racing. As long as you were quite careful at the start of specifying that it was linked to a particular race or a particular season, it would mean that after about 8 or 9 months, you had the opportunity to pull the plug if you didn't have enough resources to man that blog. Because at the start, you've already said, this is specific to a particular event. And that's the common mistake that brands make. They literally obviously put a generic profile up there and say, here we are, where they don't really know whether resources are available to maintain it. So, if you do that right at the start, give yourself kind of like a timeout, as it were, after a particular event or season, then obviously, hopefully, it's a lot less scary to sell to yourselves and to everyone else.